Carbohydrates are fun. Who doesn't love a bowl of pasta? They make us feel satisfied, happy, and relaxed. That's a side effect of raising blood sugar, by the way. But overeating carbs, particularly simple carbs, leads to metabolic deficits. This starts a spiral of low energy that leads to overeating, resulting in weight gain. What if instead we could introduce some healthy swaps and switch simple for complex carbohydrates? Instead of white bread, get a whole grain one. Instead of white rice, get some beans and legumes. Could this lead to a better metabolic health and more energy? The notion that carbs are bad grew in parallel with the rising rates of obesity and diabetes. And that's fair, considering most people overeat sugars and simple carbohydrates. But that's not to say that carbs are bad. Carbohydrates as macronutrients aren't bad in and of themselves. They are an essential piece to a balanced diet. Glucose is the main energy source for the body. The brain needs glucose to fire up its cognitive-based processes. The muscle uses glycogen to fire up quickly and push and activate. The body uses glucose as the quick source of energy, and so it is essential. However, overeating simple carbohydrates can lead to issues that I like to call metabolic dysfunction. Before picking your carbohydrates, let's see what a glycemic index is. You've probably heard you need to eat more low GI foods, where glycemic index stands for the ability of a carbohydrate to raise blood glucose after consumption. Higher GI is associated with simpler carbohydrates, which will spike up glucose, and lower GI means a complex carbohydrate that'll keep the levels stable. When a food has a glycemic index above 70, it's considered high GI. These include white bread, pasta, and potatoes. Medium GI foods are those between 55 and 70, like whole grain bread, brown rice, whole wheat pasta, and beans. A lower GI score than 50 categorizes food in the low GI bracket, including things like green leafy vegetables, nuts, oatmeal, barley, and other legumes. High GI foods are your fluffier, simpler, whiter carbohydrates. These are things like white bread, pasta, rice, pancakes, right? Then there are low GI foods like green leafy vegetables or whole grain. These are packed with fiber, these are tougher to chew and take longer to digest. Typically, these things are found in legumes and beans and nuts, whole grains, seeds, green leafy vegetables, etc. This is why simple carbs are demonized. This is what they do to blood glucose. So ingestion of high amount of simple carbohydrates will lead to a sharp increase in glucose levels in the blood. This helps increase insulin, which is a hormone that transports that glucose from the blood to tissues. High, sharp elevations of glucose and/or insulin in the blood leads to specific metabolic dysfunctions and increases the risk of developing diabetes, cardiovascular issues, or obesity. Healthier people tend to have more stable blood glucose levels, and keeping your blood glucose on a roller coaster is not what you want if you're into metabolic health. This is what happens with glucose and insulin after a large meal rich in simple carbohydrates. There is a sharp increase in blood glucose followed by elevation of insulin. Energy spikes up. We feel great until the next crash. This is what happens after ingesting complex carbohydrates, preferably combined with fat and protein. Slower elevation of glucose with stable elevation in insulin. Energy lasts for longer, there is not a sharp decline or an energy crash. Those with poor insulin sensitivity either can't secrete enough insulin to transport glucose, or that insulin cannot recognize glucose in the blood to take it and transport it, which is bad because it leads to a spike in blood glucose levels. To summarize, eating complex carbohydrates will prevent sharp spikes and drops in blood glucose and insulin levels, keeping your blood glucose managed and more stable. This is why we like complex carbs more. Quick one. If there's one thing I've learned from 4 years of active research is that energy is key for health. Fatigue is the early sign of physiological dysfunction in the body, which degrades life. Greater energy levels translate to greater vitality, health, and optimal performance. We've packed all this research into a digital product called Energy Elevation. We showcase the 11 strategies to increase your energy levels, from things like fasting and resistance training to HIIT cardio and electrolytes. We cover a lot of practical tips. The goal is to carve an efficient path for greater vitality, well-being, and longevity. If you're eager to join this mission, check the link in the description and join the waitlist. It's a digital set of an ebook, video collection, and a habit tracker. We're planning to launch in Q4, so those who join the waitlist get 20% off 10 days post-launch. Let's get it. Why are we talking about carbs and how they've been demonized at all? Well, currently, a lot of people tend to overeat simple carbs and sugars, and this leads to metabolic deficits, increasing the rates of diabetes, obesity. So it is a real problem. Now, most of us, we need a quick burst of energy, and sugars are the easiest, simplest, and most convenient and efficient way to get us this. Sugars are way easier to find in comparison to finding a quality fat or protein around you. Due to excessive sugar consumption, we end up in a loop in which our body becomes less efficient of sort of absorbing, metabolizing, and using glucose for energy. Because we run in an energy deficit and we can't create more energy, we think eating more sugar will solve the problem. But over time, we are just ending in a loop of sugar-induced fatigue. This is why simple carbohydrates have been demonized and complex carbohydrates have been promoted as healthier. And in the proper ratio, quantity, and type, carbs are great. Carbs are essential pieces to a balanced diet. While simple carbs aren't bad in the right context, for example, after a hard, heavy training session in the gym, the muscle will suck up a lot of that glucose in. It's great to eat carbs. In highly metabolically flexible people, eating simple carbs will be used way better than in those who are metabolically inflexible. And those with greater insulin sensitivity, you can use more simple sugars, etc. But generally, for most people, a good outline is to introduce more complexity to their carbohydrate intake, and for that, we do a few simple swaps. You can swap some of the white bread for whole grain toast and add some healthy fat and protein to your sandwich. Add more beans, legumes, and lentils instead of just pure white rice in your diet as the main dietary source of carbs. Instead of white pasta, swap it up for whole grain or other legume versions of pasta like chickpea, spinach, or lentils. Lastly, consume more low glycemic index fruits like berries, cherries, oranges, apples, and grapefruit. Here and there, all of us indulge in simple carbohydrates. We like some pasta, we like some rice, and we tend to enjoy some pancakes and sweets. That's okay. But a great hack to improve metabolic health is to have those simple carbohydrates as close to your workout window as possible. If you have them pre-workout, your muscle will use up that glycogen as an energy source, and it is even better to have them after a workout when the muscle is hungry for glucose and it can sort of swoop and suck in all that glucose to replenish glycogen stores. And of course, it's ideal to do resistance training on a weekly basis because then you can get away with eating more simple carbohydrates and your blood glucose is still gonna fluctuate less than someone who doesn't. The reason for this is the greater the muscle mass, the more place for glucose we have. The muscle is a glucose disposal organ. We can get away with eating more carbs as we'll refuel the glycogen in the muscle, not spiking our blood glucose so much. So if there's one practical tip to take from this is if you can manage to get your simple carbohydrates after your workout, it'll be better because it won't spike your blood glucose levels so much as that glucose is going to be sucked into the muscle to replenish glycogen reserves. This is why you've seen endurance athletes and bodybuilders eat large portion of white carbs and still maintain a low fat percentage while looking and feeling good. That's about it. Now, next time you go shopping, try to do a couple of swap. Instead of white, do some black complex carbohydrates. So get some quinoa, get some legumes, beans, nuts, seeds. That'll do the trick for you. Another great tip is if you're eating a lot of white bread and white pasta and white rice, try to swap all of that for a whole grain toast, whole grain pasta, which is great, and a little bit of brown rice. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go and cook myself some pasta. Bye. For glycemic index stands for the ability of a complex carbohydrate that'll keep the labels stable.